seated. All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Prior to starting our meeting, since I kind of kick off the committees, I'm just going to take a moment of privilege just to ask for a very brief moment of silence for the individuals impacted and affected by the incidences that happened over the weekend. I was out of town. I got back, and actually one of the young lady from Rochester is actually connected to my church. So I want to just have a brief moment of silence just to recognize those folks. Thank you. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call the Parks and Public Works Committee to order, and I'd ask Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Councilmember Lightfoot.
Present.
Councilmember Gruber.
Here.
Councilmember Pio.
Here.
President Melendez.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Introduction number 70, authorizing agreement for the Blue Cross Arena at the War Memorial Ice Plant Replacement Project. Any questions, comments, and/or concerns? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move it.
I need a second.
Sorry, I was just looking at the.
Take your time, Dr. Group. Take your time. Take your time.
I do have some general questions about the. So I see the answer here. I assume Commissioner Perrin provided a lot of answers around what the Pegula family has put in, or the Pegula, pardon me, the company has put into the Blue Cross. What do you see as some of the big investments needed moving forward?
I would say moving forward, a lot of it is based on what we're planning on doing with the ARPA funds and sort of a continuation of that. So we're looking at the expansion to make it a more, I'll call it modernized facility for meetings. But ultimately, and I'll let City Engineer Barrett get in here, but I think a big part of it is just that the seats, the bowl seats, really need to be re-upped at some point in time. We've done, as you look at the list of work that was done in response to your request, you know, we haven't exactly gotten to the point where do most of the people sit. So that's one where we've started looking at, and we have an initial estimate of that. I would say that's a large amount of it. And then the other one is just maintaining a building that goes back to having been built in the 50s, as well as making sure that whatever we do with the opening and the re-envisioning of Broad Street at that component, at that portion, when that occurs, making sure that the War Memorial itself is a much more, I'll call it, visible space. Because right now, I don't think a lot of people know that we have a War Memorial there in honor of our veterans of all conflicts. I mean, there's an eternal flame there, but you wouldn't know it unless you come walking down and cut through Court Street to Broad Street or vice versa. But to me, the seating is really the next big major improvement that will need to occur. And again, we've taken care of a lot of the mechanicals and the specifics that we have to for code, but ultimately those seats are in some pretty rough shape.
Thanks. No, I was actually there for the sectional basketball game last Saturday night. Sadly, East lost to Sutherland, which I'm not happy about, but it is what it is. I agree. The seats are certainly tough for people of any size, frankly. When something like that happens, when you decide, okay, we're going to look at the seating, how does it start? Is there a conversation between the city and what's the Pegula company called?
Ryan, do you have the exact name of the subsidiary that they use for that?
Yeah, it's Rochester Arena LLC is what they do.
So do you sit down, I mean, in this particular one where we needed a new ice maker, was there a conversation, or how does this work?
Yeah, so I would say outside of the regular communication that we maintain with Rochester Arena LLC, which is really probably a subsidiary of Pegula Sports Entertainment, PSE, there's also a committee that meets that has representatives from both the city as well as our operator. And as part of that, we have both members of Buildings and Parks through DES, which is Director Liberty serves on that, as well as a member from OMB. And I also believe, Brian, do we have a member from law on there as well? Yeah. So those are our 3 members, and then they'll have their folks, including the person who's responsible for operations. But we don't limit it to just those meetings. There's constant conversations back and forth, especially just making sure that, one, as we progress this design, we're moving out towards the river, but also just recognizing that, again, this is an additive element that I would consider in addition to the things that just need for the upkeep, repair, and upgrades, if you will, for what happens at the arena.
Got it. I'm happy to second this and take it to a vote. I'd appreciate before the council meeting if the answers, these bullet points, we could just have some kind of valuation, some quantification of how many dollars we have spent on all these different things. I don't need it down to the exact penny, but it'd be nice to be able to see that that LLC has made. I assume these are in the millions of dollars of investments.
Yes, combined, absolutely.
Be great to see what a total dollar amount is, but in the meantime, I'll second it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
so
Chairman.
it's been approximately $2 million since signing the current licensing agreement, but we can get you specifics as well as year of expenditure, which I think is important to note.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, comments, or concerns by any of my other colleagues here? It's been moved, it's been second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right, introductory number 71, authorizing agreement for the Rochester Police Department Office of Business Intelligence renovation project. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Not, I entertain a motion.
Move.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any nays? All right, motion carries. Introductory number 72, I see we have a disclosure of interest form here from President Melendez to disclose affiliation only and may vote. Authorizing an amendatory agreement for the Joseph A. Florino Rochester Riverside Convention Center South Terrace and Addition Project. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Yes.
Councilmember Pio.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And one of the questions that's already answered, it states that the overall project estimate at this time is $27 million. Is that just for the South Terrace in addition to the Rochester Riverside Convention Center?
No, that's not. That's for the 3 elements of the of what you just mentioned, along with the river wall rehabilitation and the critical envelope repairs.
Thank you.
You're
Any,
welcome.
any other questions, comments, or concerns? If not, excuse me, I'll entertain a motion.
I do have one last question.
Councilman Gruber.
So the overall project estimate this time is $27 million. And we've gotten some or will anticipate some reimbursements from New York State on this. What's the thoughts on raising money for this long term?
At this point in time, we're still investigating the options, but we do have the ability to do the river wall rehabilitation and the critical building envelope repairs with the funding available. We do have some money that would allow for a very, very minor expansion of that terrace. The issue that we run into is that to repair the river wall and to do, to prepare the river wall, the envelope will be obviously all around the building, as the word envelope denotes. But to do the river wall, we have to be in the river. And so that means that you have to have the equipment to do the reconstruction in the river. That's a significant mobilization cost and will in all likelihood involve coffer dams, which is basically taking out the water, placing the crane, keeping the water out of it and doing that. If we do that, going back and doing the Riverside or the South Terrace addition would be pretty expensive and undo some of the work that we've done. So we're investigating all of our options for those, including state funds as well as what we might have available in the city. I mean, I'll defer to the OMB Director Burns if there's something more specific, but we're still working towards it. And one of the luxuries we have is that this is a pretty significant design, which is the reason for the increase that you're seeing, is we need to take this from preliminary design at about 30% to the actual drawings and schematics that we can hand to somebody to go out and build it. So we do have some time to come up with it, and part of those South Terrace additions are not going to be wasted money at all.
Got it. It seems to me we have, between this and the aqueduct and probably some other ones too, there's these projects that the cost keeps getting greater as we get further into it, which I think is natural, especially given the construction environment out there right now. But these are projects that the state has urged us to do. The state has a lot more money than we have, and I'm hoping that we're not just talking to the state on a kind of project-by-project basis, but we're talking about some kind of larger construction support. I see some heads nodding, so presumably?
Yeah, I would answer in the affirmative to that we have looked at this as, again, the Rock to Riverway initiative. It's not an individual project, it's a program of projects. And so as we begin to evaluate these things, we're looking at what we can do with the available funds that were allocated. But again, they were allocated in some cases based on what was produced in 2018. And there's a couple of elements to remember. You mentioned one, which is obviously we've had significant cost escalation since that time. We're seeing some stabilization in prices for both labor and materials on both the building and the transportation side. What we will not see is a decrease. So all we're seeing is that the rate of growth is slowing to what it was. And I would point to anybody who's flown. If you go back to, when West Texas Intermediate crude was $143 a barrel or whatever it was, airlines started charging for baggage fees. Oil has dropped significantly. You still pay a baggage fee. In this case, we have contractors and suppliers that are going to continue to charge those prices. I would also add that even after doing, at least on the transportation side, a concept level planning analysis that can constitute hundreds of pages, multiple appendices, the engineering instruction from the New York State Department of Transportation says consider at least a 40% contingency. The cost estimates that were done on a lot of these projects were done on much, much less than that, and they were done on what I would not even call concept level plannings, but ideas. So you're right, as we start to develop these, the costs are going up and down, but it's that combination, what I would call the factor of what things cost when they were put together and they weren't projected into a year of expenditure. And on top of that, just nobody saw what was going to happen with COVID and the rise in prices as a result of supply chain disruption and then ultimately lack of labor. So as backlogs grow and contractors have more work they can do, they're not willing to take on additional work at the same price. So their margins increase and those margins are passed along to us.
State should pay for it. That's it. I'm good. Thank you.
Sorry, follow-up. When I visit San Antonio, Texas, the Riverwalk is amazing. Do we have any future eyes for development along the river in that area? Because we have a lot of open space over there.
I would say the open space is somewhat limited because as you continue north, we have Charles Carroll Plaza, but we have the trail on both sides that can constitute a little bit of what you're seeing. But again, in San Antonio, and having been there as well, I mean, it's a pretty awesome experience. It winds. It's not a river that necessarily built that city per se, but it did lead to the development being along it. And I say didn't build it because they didn't have flour mills and things like that. With that said, any open space that could potentially be used for future private development, which is our first and foremost priority, is what we're looking at. But most of those are further south along the river wall where you look at where the North Star Commons was recently completed. And then as we move further south, we want to look at the former vacuum oil site, and that's the West River Wall Phase 2. That cleanup would be significant for the Plex neighborhood, but it would be significant for the city because that's where we could look at more of the development that you're talking about, the restaurants and things like that. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we could be looking at, but I think every city now no longer puts their industry along their riverfront. They put it in services and primarily entertainment and recreational type districts. But
Good.
In that location, if you really look at what we're bounded by, it's going to be 3 public facilities in the convention center, the library and the arena, and then the development that's occurring at the Aqueduct campus.
Thank you.
Councilperson Harris?
I just want to add that that's South District, Councilmember Pio.
Bring it to the northwest then if you want.
I'm not getting in that.
If there's no other questions, comments, or concerns at this time, I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Introductory number 73, authorizing an agreement for Bull's Head Revitalization Project. Any questions, comments, and/or concerns?
Question?
Councilperson Harris.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Lightfoot. Through the administration, I'd like to know, is there a more available cost breakdown for this project? I mean, I know that things have gone up, you mentioned oil changing and all that stuff, so can you make that available to us, council, if there's something that you can give us?
Yeah, we absolutely can. I mean, again, what we're coming for at this point in time is for the road infrastructure that we can put in, which we were able to obtain federal funds for the federal aid eligible portions. But we can give you a breakdown based on our typical, what I would call major cost centers, such as preliminary design, final design, any right-of-way incidentals and acquisition, construction,
Absolutely.
and inspection.
And then the other piece is, I'd like to know is, can you give us a timeline, like, an estimated timeline, of course? And then, is there any plans to engage the residents and notify them in any kind of notification on the project?
Sure. I want to make sure that we make a distinction in terms of the timeline for what we're talking about here, which is the design and construction of the road network versus the overall development, which would obviously fall under the purview of the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development. But yeah, we can absolutely do that. And in terms of engagement, we will treat this like we do any other project, where it'll be a minimum of 2 public meetings that we'll conduct in a hybrid fashion, both for those that want to participate virtually as well as in person. And also to make sure that that first meeting is to identify opportunities, issues, and needs. And then the second one is to receive feedback on what we heard and how we've translated that into the actual design of the street network.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioner, I appreciate the fact that, those community meetings are hybrid. I know that was one of my concerns very early on, and I thank you guys for, making that happen. And that's very important in this post-pandemic world that we're living in. People are more attuned and connected in that way, and so I really appreciate that. Thank Council Vice President Lupien for joining us as well. And at this time, Councilmember Pio, did you have a question, sir?
Yes. Not to step on Councilmember Lachey's feet here, so don't mind my question here. There was a building that used to be on West Main and Brown that used to be in the Northwest District. Now it's no longer. This might be a legal question, but I recall requesting information about it, that the city was contemplating eminent domain, if we needed to, with a gentleman who did not want to sell the business to the city. Do we have any, I requested if we had any information regarding if we were taking that in eminent domain or were we purchasing it?
That's something in terms
that
of
an
land
NBD?
assembly. Yeah, we probably work with NBD, but what I
Okay.
will do is ensure that not only does that get back to them, but also if it would have any effect on the street design. as
Okay.
well.
Thank you.
And I know we're planning on doing most of those. I mean, there may be strip takings and things like that, but we won't know until we get in and do our actual layout. But regardless, it sounds like you're asking in terms of future development, that would be more on the actual development side and not the public space.
Thank you.
We can look into that.
All right, I need a motion and a second.
Move it.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introductory number 74, resolution authorizing the implementation and funding of the first instance of 100% of the federal aid and state Marchicelli program aid eligible costs of a transportation federal aid project and appropriating funds for the Bull's Head Revitalization Project. Any questions, comments, and/or concerns? None. I'll entertain a motion in a second.
Move it.
It's been moved.
Second.
It's been second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion carries. Introduction number 75, authorizing an agreement for the Dewey Avenue Emerson Street Improvement Project. Any questions, comments, and/or concerns?
Yes.
Councilmember Pio.
Thank you. Concerning Emerson Street, one of the concerns on the more east side was the curbs. It seems like many of the curbs were going underground, were no longer protruding above ground. I know that we are reconstructing the road and we're talking about curbs. Does that mean we're also going to put in new curbs?
Yes, where those are needed, we absolutely do. That's part of our reconstruction as opposed to our rehabs, milling, and resurfacing or preventive and corrective maintenance treatments. So absolutely. This is where we get to get in there and get right down to the base and sub-base and make it basically a modernized road. And this is, again, one of these ones where if we're going to go in and realign a non-standard intersection, we're going to go in and do all of the work, as we know, with catch basins and look for other opportunities for multimodal considerations.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You got it.
Council President Melendez.
Yes, so Commissioner, just one broad question that doesn't pertain necessarily to the legislation, but I think would be helpful for the council. As we pursue infrastructure dollars, federal infrastructure dollars, could we get maybe in a future committee meeting or at some other session, an update on how the city plans to pursue those resources and what types of projects we're going to be pursuing in that vein?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really, you've got these two primary pieces of federal legislation that came out. The first was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That's actually where the funds, I believe, well, definitely for Bull's Head, and I believe there may even be some on here for that. So those funds are already, I'll call it, programmed at the regional level. But
And that's what I thought, and that's what I think what I probably meant to really ask is, could we get a sense of overall, what is the city's plan for infrastructure dollars?
Yeah, and some of these things are still coming out. So in a lot of cases, they created new programs or they're revising programs. So we have to wait to see what the eligible activities that come out underneath each one. But no, between the second piece of legislation, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, included a number of climate change types of programs, and that's very much what we're looking at. In fact, we've been made aware of one program that's come out that's specifically for I think it's the 50 largest metropolitan statistical areas in the country. So it'll be us along with the 7 counties that fall into what's termed the census-defined MSA. We're already looking at that. We need to identify a lead. We've had conversations with Monroe County. We'll start those with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. But as each one of these programs come out, we're definitely looking at it. And also we've been in discussions with, again, I've kind of joked about it with the solar developers who are really hot to get on the solar development. We're looking at that as probably sometime this spring, getting a little bit more information. I'm referring it to a solar shark tank, like let them come in and pitch us. We've been working with neighborhood and business development in the planning department to identify locations where we may be able to do solar development, even if it's on a more micro level than what you see at, for example, the former Emerson Street landfill. But yeah, we can start to put together the various programs we're looking at. But in addition to the funding that we've received for Bull's Head and some others through the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, which included the Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization, which is a bill that's been around for 60 years and continues to go reauthorized every 4 to 5 years. There's also the discretionary funding opportunities, things like the RAISE program, reconnecting communities. So we've sort of continued to develop our projects as the administrations come in, but we have our eye on some of those for other initiatives as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we're committed to showing our hand, but we would at least note that these are other federal programs from transportation, that the well is not completely dry. It's just instead of us being at a regional table, we have to make our case through our federal partners.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks, Chair Lightfoot, for letting me go on a tangent for a moment.
All right. Council Vice President Lupien.
Yeah, we're not done with the tangent. While we're here, I had a question around the Justice 40 initiative. And, the way that they define disadvantaged areas is actually very different. And we're one of the only communities in New York State outside of Niagara Falls and somewhere else that qualifies. And so how are we aggressively targeting those dollars?
Well, I believe that those are usually a consideration when those funds are coming out. So if you're in a program, it's basically like, okay, there's preferential.
So it just gives us preferential treatment.
Yeah, I will go back though and verify if there's anything specific for the communities that fall within that. But no, we say it early and often and very loud that, oh, by the way, this is going on. We also use it when we're going for state funds as well.
Okay. And then the second question is, maybe a month ago, I saw that there were some extra funds being allocated towards upstate wind. And are we looking at that?
I'd have to get back to you on that. And I know within a lot of cases, whenever we look at like wind, there's always the concern of placement and where these things are.
Lake Ontario.
I mean, you're dealing with, and again, everybody says, oh, this is what they look like. And it's always a consideration, but it's the migratory bird patterns and things like that, which is how are you affecting the environment relative to how you're benefiting from it. So I would say that I'll have to get back to you on any specifics, but
yeah, I'd be interested to pursue that. Lake Erie on Lake Erie, Cleveland is one of the first installations, if not the first installation on the Great Lakes, and I think it's an area that that would bring us a lot of benefit to our local area. So I'd like to keep that conversation going.
Yeah, I would also say just on that note, there's also the due diligence that's required to ensure that when a developer comes in with a proposal that they're actually seeing the amount of what I'll call necessary natural resource required to generate the amount of clean electricity that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And also starting to look at a full, basically a full scale, or I should say a full view approach to this, which is, well, what does it actually take to go under the water, put things in the ground? What are all of those other considerations that need to be considered through both the State Environmental Quality Review Act and if there's any federal funds, the National Environmental Policy Act.
Okay.
So there's a lot to it, but yes. I'll
Of
get back
course,
to you on
it's a
it
big,
before
it's a big
Thanksgiving.
undertaking. Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, if there's no other questions or comments or concerns, I need a motion and a second.
Move it.
Second.
It's been moved and second, now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Introductory number 76, resolution authorizing the implementation and funding in the first instance of 100% of the federal aid state Marchicelli programs aid eligible costs of a transportation federal aid project, appropriating funds for the Dewey Avenue Emerson Street reconstruction project. Any questions, comments, and/or concerns?
Move it.
It's been
Second.
moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 77, bond ordinance of the City of Rochester, New York, authorizing the issuance of $2,950,000 bonds of said city to finance the Farmington Road and Wyan Crescent Rehabilitation Project. Any questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I entertain a motion in second.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Introductory number 78, bond ordinance of the City of Rochester, New York, authorizing the issuance of $223,000 bonds of said city to finance water service improvements associated with the Farmington Road and Wayne Crescent Rehabilitation Project. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Move it.
Been
Second.
moved in second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 79, authorizing an agreement for the Farmington Road and Wayne Crescent Rehabilitation Project. Any questions, comments, or
Move it.
concerns? Been moved,
Second.
been second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 80, authorizing.
Move it.
It's been moved.
I do have a question.
Yes, Councilmember Gruber.
So, on this one, we are authorizing changes in pavement width, but I also see there's a question around bicycle transit, and the answer from DES was that shared use travel lanes are proposed, which will be the same as the existing condition. So why are we expanding the pavement width on Farmington Road if we're not also creating more space for alternative forms of, for non-car transport?
Those are going to be for bump outs specifically.
Tell me more. Why?
So,
What's,
well, the bump outs are actually to provide better sight lines as well as if there's a transit stop there, they can use it. But I'll let
Yeah, and it's also a method we use for pedestrian safety. So it shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians at key intersections.
got it. Thank you.
Council Vice President Lupien.
Yeah, I have a question. Farmington is heading towards Tryon Park, am I right?
Correct.
Is there another boulevard that would get people there?
I have to look into it. Is there a particular thought behind why we would look?
Just that it's one of the only parks that has mountain biking, and it
Yeah.
seems like we would want to provide a boulevard there, knowing that that's a destination for biking. So if there isn't one already, could we identify that in part of our bike placemaking map?
Yeah, we can definitely look at that.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other questions or concerns, can I get a motion in second?
Second.
It's been moved in second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Introduction number 81, amending, oh, I'm sorry.
No, 81 when you get there. I know you-
All right. Introduction number 81, you hot for this one, right? Introduction number 81, amending the official map by abandoning a segment of Harvey Alley right-of-way. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Comment.
Councilmember Patterson.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you to the administration for moving forward on this in an extremely timely manner. Church came to me about getting this property so they could do the expansion, and I'm glad we found a way to get this done. Had a chance to attend the zoning meeting on this and was happy to see that your staff was there. They were knowledgeable. They made a solid, concise presentation and really addressed the issue. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you did on this.
Yeah, and I think specifically you're probably referring to Breasia Griffin, who is an absolute rock star.
Yeah, she did real work. That
But
was
I have to
impressive.
say, I know you put me in contact with Pastor Green, and we started working through this. And I have to say, God's Ministry did a lot of outreach on this themselves. So they were a great partner. I mean, this is how it works. They didn't say to us, how does this happen? They said, how do we make it happen? And we appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I entertain a motion and second.
Move it.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Now we vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 82, a bond ordinance of the City of Rochester, New York, authorizing the issuance of 305,000 bonds, said city to finance the 2023 residential curb ramps project, Beechwood neighborhood. Ooh, that's somebody happy over there. Any questions?
Over there, I'm right here.
Right next to you.
I'm thinking you and Ms. Speed. Any
Oh,
questions,
yeah.
comments, or concerns?
Just a question.
Vice President Lupien.
I did not go back and check, but I seem to remember in the CIP that the street improvements for that area were pushed out a couple of years. Is it moved up?
We'll have to look, and obviously, as we go through the process now of updating the budget and the CIP.
Yeah.
But we'll take a look. But this was really, as to Councilmember Gruber's note, this was identified several years ago, just the fact that there wasn't the presence of these. And there are other areas of the city that we're also looking to identify.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not often, but sometimes we just end up with these curb ramps that are non-existent, and, you know, it creates all sorts of issues for pedestrians. So as we start to look at these, when we can add them, we certainly will.
Great, thank you.
And I think Councilman Lupien, sometimes I get Beechwood mixed up with Rosewood, so I was thinking, I just got off track there, but sorry about that. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? If not, entertain a motion in second.
Move it.
It's been moved,
Second.
then second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 83, authorizing an agreement for a 2023 residential curb ramp project, Beechwood neighborhood. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Move it.
It's been moved
Second.
and second. Now we vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Introduction number 84, authorizing agreement for the 2022 lead service line, spring 2A and summer 2B. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Can't say enough about our lead replacement project and the work that you guys do there. Awesome. Thank you for that work. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Not entertain a motion in a second. Been moved.
Second.
It's been second. Now we vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. All right. With no further business, the Parks and Public Works Committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now for the slow committee meeting. At this time, I call the Business Development Committee to order, and I ask the clerk to call the roll.
Sure. Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Vice President Lupien.
Here.
President Melendez.
Here.
Thank
I
you.
just want to note that Councilmember Smith is excused today.
Cool.
All right, so we're going to let the folks have a chance to sit down and then change out from the previous committee staff to the current administration committee staff. We should only be here another 2 hours, 3 max. You might want to order in, you know. Okay. Introductory number 85. We are,
Mike. Mike.
yep.
You do presentation first?
Oh, well, you know, wait a minute. Yeah. We'll do we got Bay and them, right? Okay, so let's do Bay and those guys first. I apologize, yeah. So part of our change in structure is around doing as much of our committee work, instead of doing it in work sessions and things like that, is actually doing the work in committees. I am, in addition to being the chair for the Neighborhood and Business Development Committee, I am also a member of the Redco Board and the secretary for the Redco Board. Commissioner Miller for NBD is the president of the board. And at our last board meeting, it was brought up that Redco may well definitely need some funding. And I'm just going to start with saying I fully support additional funding for Redco, specifically and particularly unrestricted dollars to cover their administrative costs. But in order to really engage in that advocacy, it wouldn't be fair to just go around and beg for the dollars without having Redco come before this body and make a presentation and explain to the larger community what Redco does and why they have this need at this time. So towards that end, I have invited the CEO of Redco to this meeting. That is Mr. Baya Muhammad. For some of you out there looking, he might look a little familiar to you because he was previously the Commissioner for Neighborhood and Business Development. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to CEO Muhammad to give his presentation on Redco. And I just want to also mention that we have a previous Redco board member sitting in with us, who is Councilmember Lightfoot. You've got it, sir.
Thank you.
Just remember to turn on the mic.
Okay, I will not stand behind this the whole time, but I just want to thank the council. Again, my name is Baya Muhammad. Not coming up here as commissioner, coming up here now as a CEO of Rochester Economic Development Corporation. What I want to do here today, briefly, probably for 10 minutes, and then allow time for questions, is just to give a quick overview of what Redco has been up to for the last 3 years, starting right before the major pandemic. Just plenty of time for questions as I'll get through this very quickly. You could just go to the next slide. But again, thank you for your time. I know I'm not part of the administration or the normal course of the agenda. So just to get right at it, Redco is requesting $500,000 a year for the next 3 years. Right now, the organization, we were blessed with some startup money from the city. Right now, our receivables are around close to $4 million. We have about $6 million in between CDs and our savings account. That money, however, is money that's used for loan dollars or some grant dollars, and that's why we're coming to the council today. And I'll talk about some of our plans for the future. Next slide. So who are we? Some of you know that already. 3 years ago, there was I don't really like to use the word separation, but there was a new direction for the organization. And what we do, neighborhood development, we support micro and small businesses, emerging entrepreneurs, established small businesses, and enterprise companies, meaning companies that are located in different locations. This is just some of our progressions since we started. I won't read through all that, but we're focused on equitable neighborhood development for existing and new businesses. This is part of our new approach. Incremental changes over time, making sure we keep up with business trends, and also, too, lastly, we have funding, which I'll talk about later, funding with no really operational dollars. A common challenge for other nonprofits in our community, particularly as it pertains to economic development corporations in this city and across the country. Next. This is just our mission and vision, and I will read this. We create equitable neighborhood wealth for existing and new businesses through strategic economic development. Redco's top priority is to be proactively develop programs to effectively improve funding aimed to reduce wealth disparities in middle-income and poor Rochester communities by supporting local and small neighborhood businesses that are urban entrepreneurs. Thank you. Do I need that? All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, I won't repeat that slide. But next slide. So some of our programs. When we got started, I think the initial belief was businesses need funding. That is a challenge, and it's still a challenge in some parts of our city. But we quickly understood that it's not only financing, but it's education about business. Many of our businesses do not have legacy in their families, their first generation. They don't have the networks. They don't have banking relationships. And so we partnered with Monroe Community College. Monroe Community College already had a program called Launch Your Business. We went in and tailored to our needs. So we provide that. It's a 10-week program. And we've had 24 participants. We have another class starting probably sometime in the summer. Topics that are covered: business plan, profit, financials, P&L, equipment requirements, leasing. During this class, which is over 10 weeks, they are partnered with a mentor slash coach that's attending the program with them, and these coaches come from SCORE. We have also offered enhanced accounting classes and advanced QuickBooks. You might ask why. These are some of the things that are basic reasons why businesses close, open and close, because they don't understand numbers, they don't have relationships, and then they end up closing or contacting one of you or us when it might be too late. We've also run a resource enhancement program with 6 entrepreneurship support organizations. That was provided by New York State. I can't look at you anymore, but New York State helped us out with that program through the Revitalize Rochester. And during that 2-year period, organizations were partnered with coaches, and they were all asked to identify a challenge they had with that. And many of the organizations that were part of the program came out on the other end or have been able to access funding to support their programs. Next slide. Go back for a second. Sorry. The last slide. Yes. Part of the findings, and I believe I have the final report in my email now, was mentioned earlier, all the organizations that were involved have challenges with operational support and also marketing. So many of you, some of your constituents have asked, we don't know what's going on here, we don't know what's going on there. It's not that it's gatekeeping going on, but a lot of organizations don't have marketing budgets or operational dollars to support programming. This is why you see a lot of other organizations, they have a micro unit that's actually supporting businesses. Next. These are some of our funding partners. New York State through ESD, that's the Revitalize Rochester. We have spent the last probably year and a half, because of change in administration, change here locally, working to renegotiate our terms with New York State. We're happy to say we've done that, we've turned in our reporting, but there's no operational support with that, which we need. We were awarded a $1 million grant through the SBA to continue to work for the Resource Enhancement Program. And ESL, M&T have supported us through Launch Your Business. The banks at the bottom of the slide are the banks that are that's a line of credit to use to support the Revitalize Rochester. Next slide. So these are some of the business that we funded through COVID. Again, we started probably 3 weeks officially before COVID, but these are a list of businesses that we have supported. I do want to make note, Mama San's, Rufus, State Property, Little People's Lounge, the Commissary, La Marqueta. These are projects that we did in conjunction with the city of Rochester. Also noting here, COVID happened, we were the first to grant the public market $50,000 to support. This was before PPP. On the right-hand side, this is just some other projects that were funded by the Revitalize Rochester Fund. So as you see on this slide, we have support of our business associations and also businesses. Next slide. These are our results for the last 3 years. Active loan and grants, and that means loans that were active, that we're receiving interest payments from. Mainly, that's around 1%. We're receiving funding. These are our results prior. Now, the rate commission, the locus report, and also to the Rochester 2034, and this is not a good mic, needed a new mic. All mention lack of access to capital for women-owned, Black, Latino-owned companies. So this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like right now. So we've increased that 41% of the dollars out there are being loaned to black businesses, 6% Hispanic, 6% Asian, and 40% white. So this tells us we have a lot more work to do, but we're making improvements. We need more Asian businesses and Hispanic businesses to fill that pie up. So at the bottom too, you mentioned we've supported a number of women-owned businesses, which was also notated in the RAISE report and all those reports I just mentioned. Next slide. So pass-through dollars, I thought this was important to put on the slide. Through cooperation of the Office of Community Wealth Building, now Financial Empowerment Center, REDCO has been a conduit for funding to move through to the city because many of these funders will not give directly to the city. So REDCO has been a conduit for that. And you might ask the question, do we charge? Yes, we've been between 1 or 2% for these transactions. But the city has secured $784,000 since 2020 for both of those offices, and we've just been a conduit to allow that to happen. Next. So what's next? We have applied for our CDFI. Has anybody been on the Treasury website lately? They are not receiving any more applications. It has been a long wait. Hopefully we will hear results from that soon. This will open up capital for our organization, loan capital from other banking institutions and philanthropy. We want to increase our collaboration. We will be adding coaching and mentoring for businesses. We want to add Dale Carnegie training, and also research papers, a business lab, and increase our fundraising and increase productivity and accountability. Next slide. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight the diversity of our team. Many of those that you see here are entrepreneurs or have some experience with economic development in their past. Like any, I'm sure the council here is familiar, it's been a rocky road. It's been very difficult through a pandemic. Interviewing people over Zoom or Teams, it's been very challenging, but this is our team now, and we are gelling as a team, but we want to continue the work. And so we don't want to wait till our coffers are at zero. We believe that the city is a partner, but also the city helped us get to this point. But as we support businesses, that slide you just showed, now those are jobs in the community, and also we're increasing the tax base, and ultimate goal is to make the neighborhoods safer and more secure for our children. So that is it. I know I went through that very quickly, but I'll take questions.
I have a
Vice President, Councilman Harris, and then Councilman Wu.
Okay. I completely agree tying workforce development to neighborhood security, and I appreciate you for making that link. I have some questions about, so the team that you have up there, are these the only employees of REDCO?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you have an idea of expenses versus revenue for the past 3 years?
Yeah, so our revenues are probably around $200,000, and our budget is around 1.2. So we have, that's $1 million gap.
Right. Okay. And when you say that you, for the number of businesses that were with the city of Rochester, what does that partnership look like?
One of us is at the table first. The other one's drawing the other one in. We also do the same thing with the county or the state. A lot of these examples here that you see that I put an asterisk by, we're able to close a little bit faster. Meaning close the deal, get the money to the business a little bit faster. Just, it's not through this process. But we do have a governing board that votes yay or nay on the deal. So that's what it looks like.
Is the funding coming from REDCO or from the city or both?
Some, all those cases that are up there, they came from both.
Okay. The Launch Your Business program.
Yeah.
Is that similar to what Fast Track was doing, or is it different?
It's a little bit different. I'm familiar with the Fast Track program. I think Dr. Ogilvy was heading that up. But one of the major differences is a coach is attending the class with you. So I don't know if anyone knows. Well, I'll talk about my experience. If you're a commissioner, you haven't experienced it before, a coach is going to help you through that process. Probably not anything the government embraces, but our businesses need that, because first generation, they might run into mistakes that the coach has already experienced and be able to steer them away from that. Because running a business it can get lonely, it's very risky, and you need mentors. And I'm sure Councilor Lightfoot can attest, made a lot of mistakes, but now he's more seasoned and he can offer advice to another one.
Yeah.
But it's a constant learning experience. So that coach is attending the class with.
I completely understand. My husband's a small business owner, so I've been up and down on the roller coaster with him. The $25,000 that you're getting from ESL, and I think it was 15 from M&T for that program, does that go towards stipends or paying the mentors?
So that goes to pay for the class. So Monroe Community College, they actually are the instructors. So they're, professional business instructors. So that goes to pay them. We have applications out there for more funding. One of the things we're being super conscious of now is everything we apply for has some operational end to it. The funding that you see up there doesn't have operational dollars to it. That also was negotiated before the split. Redco, it was Redco's, but Redco's with the city. We went on our own, and there were no operational dollars with it because that was not the agreement from the beginning. We also thought, I thought, my team thought, rather than give the money all back to the state, we would figure it out, because there's too much good not to.
Two more questions. The businesses that were funded, you said that you listed, those were from 2020 to 2023?
These are businesses since 2020.
Okay, so about 3 years?
About 3 years.
Okay, so that works out to like 6.5 for the loan fund and 3 per year, and then 3 for the Revitalize Rochester Fund. Is there a plan to increase those numbers of businesses we can help every year?
Yeah. So the people you see up here weren't the folks that are with us in the beginning. We've increased our workforce. Yes, to answer your question, yes. But like any startup, there's bumps and bruises. We've had different underwriters. We've had some staff. But also, we've been administering other programs. So not only the resource enhancement program. So it's been a lot of moving.
So you're helping businesses that you didn't get money towards, but you're helping them grow through the classes. Yeah. That's what I thought you were saying. Did I misunderstand?
I don't know.
When you said you were implementing other programs.
Our resource enhancement program, the Launch Your Business program, and also to administering loans and grants.
Right.
So it's we are working to reduce the timeline, but it's a lot of moving pieces. Legal fees, we deal with that here in the city, I know. Putting deals together, also underwriting, and then we have a government board that it goes to, which is once a month. So we're constantly working on ways to speed up the process, but also make sure that the businesses are ready.
Yeah.
We've been in the pandemic, so a lot of the projects you see out there, construction overruns. I'm just talking about that right now with the commissioner.
Commissioner,
Babe,
could you
can
go?
you stay at the mic,
Let's just go to
please?
the main mic here.
Yes,
There we
construction.
go.
I like to move around. So we've had construction overruns. We've had, unfortunately, some deaths. Legal deaths, architecture
I thought you said
died.
deaths.
Yeah, we've had deaths, not on our team, on other people's team.
Oh, God.
So it's been almost everything that could happen that was challenging has happened in the last
So,
years.
Thank
so
you.
just to that point, and one of the things that Mr. Muhammad hasn't covered is when you're looking at Redco, think about it as the executed loans and the dollars that we give out through the revitalization fund. That's the top of the pyramid. There's a whole lot of hand-holding going on underneath, helping businesses get loan ready. Because just because you came and asked for some money doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you get a constructive no. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. Again, going back to the networks, folks that come through and they have them very quickly through the process, but many of the folks we're serving don't. Some of them don't even have lawyers, which we really can't do that anymore because it causes too many challenges when it gets to closing. There's too many more documents that have to be signed. But through the relationship of Just Cause, they are taking on folks that might not qualify, or they don't have the money to pay for a lawyer right now. But these are all the pieces of the ecosystem that are
Gotta stay.
that are we're working to put together, but they're not actually working in sync. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So we're this community, I believe, is primed and ready for more entrepreneurs, but it's still very much a big company town with small companies in it now. That's a culture shift. You know, you have to think small business every day. And a lot of us, when you hear the announcements, we get excited about 1,000 people being hired, but we have somebody right here. Even they might hire 2 people or they might have 4 people. They're still viable for the corridor, right? But they're not going to get the attention. We just saw something the other day, $375 million loan. That's good. That's good. But that same attention is not put on a smaller business in our community or the challenges that they go through.
Yeah. Thanks for answering my questions.
Yep, no problem.
And just to add to that point, when the board of Redco was very intentional about redesigning its mission and its focus. So that slide that Mr. Muhammad showed where he was talking about the vast majority of the folks getting the money being white and usually quite prosperous to it now being a more diverse group, we were very intentional about designing that. And one of the things that we did as a board as we were changing the bylaws was to ensure that the mission changed to really serving black and brown small businesses in the city of Rochester and taking the approach that there was going to be easy work and there was going to be hard work. The easy work would be those businesses that we ended up in the end giving money to. The hard work is working with some of our really small businesses that know how to do what they do, but they don't know how to ask for money, fill out documents, get all that stuff done. That's what Redco is doing. They're walking our commercial corridors and talking to those businesses and building those relationships with the understanding that, you know, you might not be able to get any money from them for a year, maybe farther out, but it's going to be a constructive no. And it's about building that capacity in those small business communities so we can get you to yes. So the next is Councilmember Harris.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Patterson. I am just really happy to see the numbers that have increased, black and brown applicants to Redco. I'm just very curious to see, you mentioned in what's next, the research papers. What kind of research papers will you guys be trying to go?
Well, on economic development, Councilor Lupien and I were just having a dialogue about bringing more attention to smaller businesses. That has to become part of the culture here. That should be the first thing that we're talking about. Small businesses, how we support those. So these research papers, which you might read some of them through the International Economic Development Council or the Retail there's no reason why we can't do this here, partnered with whether that's the police, whether it's partnered with the city council, but there are others here. There's no reason why we should not do research here. It goes out, some of that research is the basis for applying for a larger grant to support our work, the work in the city.
Thank you. And then if you can also explain what kind of collaborative, networks you're reaching out to, or, what is your plan for increased collaboration?
Understanding that we can't do all the work. So just recently, we, Pastone and Redco, they reached out to us. We're waiting to hear back when we're going to receive funding. But the cohort that we had, those were 6 organizations. The money coming through ESD. We didn't receive any money, but we administered the money. So we had Greater Works, Walker's Legacy, the Commissary, Just Cause, Ibero, Urban League. That partnership, out of that we were able to get some of the intel on what's actually going on here. But also, too, many of the organizations that I just mentioned, they've been able to establish a business unit. The Commissary has been able to secure some funding through ARPA funds. Urban League has done several classes. That's the type of partnership. So as opportunities come across my table or our team's table here, we just share it. I mean, we can't race to the bottom. But collectively, though, I think we do have to address the council, I think we have to address the county, because we're a unit trying to work together in a space, and we're all small. So that will continue. There's no reason to stop because I don't feel intimidated. I'm working to put myself out of a job. That means the city is doing great and you don't need us. But we have to share.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yes, CEO Mohammed, thanks for making the presentation today. I have a compliment, a comment, and a question. Compliment is similar to my colleagues, just it's impressive to see the results of the last 3 years. I know that there's still a lot of work to be done, but to move the needle from, looking at 80% white loans and grants pre-2020 to really diversifying that is commendable, and it's proof that you didn't put the Race Commission plan on the shelf. You looked at it, got to work. My comment is related to what you led off with, and you said that more or less that there's $1 million gap that you're looking at right now, and a request for $500,000 from the city. Is it per year for 3 years?
For 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just understanding that gap issue, how will Redco make up the additional gap that's not covered if we were to find a way to pursue that?
So one is increasing our loans. We've had, just because of market, we've had to increase our interest rates. So when Redco started, interest rates were 1% with the city. Now I think we went to 3%. Now we're at 7%, still below what a commercial loan would provide, but we have to increase our productivity. The second part of that is not relying on solely, but we've applied for our CDFI, which will open up other funding opportunities for philanthropists and other investors. And also, too, we have to fundraise. And so right now, I will be the chief fundraiser, along with working with my board. So I'm stepping out of a somewhat unfamiliar, unknown space to fundraise. Those activities can't stop. So the reason we're asking $500,000 is because we know, we don't want to become a lazy organization. We know we still have to work. And we're just not going to sit and wait for the city to close our gap. That would be nice, but we have to get out there. We are a nonprofit charity under the comptroller's office, but we have to function more like a for-profit company. That is a very difficult task in this environment, but I think all of us are up for the task and the challenge.
Thank you.
First of all, Thank you, and we're going to go to Councilmember Gruber. Councilmember Gruber, I owe you an apology. I didn't mean to skip you.
You're forgiven.
Thank you, sir.
Sincerely. Actually, I'm glad I got to hear that last comment, Bea, because I think to me that's one of the important parts of all this. You said you don't like to use the word separation, but when Redco was separated from the city 3-4 years ago or so, I don't think there was ever a sense at the time that 3 or 4 years later there'd be a price tag of $1 million annually to make up. So certainly something that was planned for is not, and maybe it's all the things that you've already talked about, but I do think that now that Redco's in the space that it is, there's going to have to be a lot of very kind of challenging fundraising, and the city can be part of that, but it's really not going to be the sole answer. To me, the bigger issue, though, with all this, and I think you've heard me say this before in some of our conversations, I would, if you're going to come to the city with maybe this is the formal ask, I don't know, but if you're going to come with a more formal ask, one thing that I'd really ask for is to help map out, there are so many organizations who occupy a very similar space, right? You talked about partnering with some of them, Pathstone, the Enterprise Center, SCORE, some of the work they do, Center for Urban Entrepreneurship. I have no idea where RIT is anymore with this space. I know they have a beautiful office building, and they talk about a lot of stuff. I don't know what they do. The U of R has NextCore and a whole bunch of other incubator programs. We have GRE that is an adjacent space. The Chamber of Commerce is an adjacent space. The city, since Redco has been gone, the city gave out, I don't know, Thad could tell me the answer, but more small business grants than I think we ever could have prior to COVID in a small amount of time. So all that being said, to me, what my question is what is the space that Redco is playing that nobody else can play? And I don't know that there's an answer for that at the moment, but I think that any kind of public funding going to Redco has to first grapple with that specific answer and question.
So all the organizations you just mentioned, besides the city and Pathstone, provide funding. But Redco works in the city proper only. So Pathstone can work in the region. Actually, they can work all over because of the CDFI. But again, this is not them or us. This is what we are doing. I just mentioned an opportunity that we have with them. But that's what makes us different.
I think it's part of a larger conversation that we all need to have. And I've seen the great work that you guys do. The paper straw company that, just opened up on Exchange Street wouldn't be, they acknowledge they would not exist if it wasn't for you guys and the work that you do, helping them get to a close faster than anyone else possibly could. But it's that kind of value statement that I want to understand what you guys have that other places don't. Because to me, it feels like sometimes a little bit of alphabet soup with a number of economic development entities working in a similar space.
Yeah, and that's, I can't completely comment to that because those are things that have been going on for decades.
Totally, yeah.
So I think where there's opportunities to identify who does what best, that's we should pursue. So we are digging in heavily into technical assistance because we see the gaps. Not only do we see them, they've been identified by the businesses. The gaps in network, the gaps in knowledge. We're going to dig in on that area because without that, I can't help get a business ready for city financing, ultimately bank financing. So the TA area is the area that we're really digging in. And we're not only going to dig in, we're going to say we're going to be the best at it. And that matters.
Yeah.
That matters.
Thank you.
Redco president, do you have anything you'd like to add? Redco board president, would you have anything you'd like to add?
What?
Thank you, council member. I appreciate you giving me a chance, and I do want to say that as the chair of the Redco board, it is a challenge, as we all can imagine, to try to help other businesses stand up at the same time we're trying to stand Redco up. So, Redco did leave the city, and when it was part of the city, the major advantage that Redco had is that folks who worked for the city were the staff for Redco. So as the deputy commissioner of NBD, I was the head of Redco. We had folks who handled the finances and the legal, and folks who worked for THAD in business development did the business outreach. So those 8 pictures of people that you see up there were in the past 8 people who worked for and were paid for the city, paid for by the city, and so part of their job was actually trying to run Redco. So once Redco became a separate institution, Bea's challenge when he left the city to run Redco, and Maria's challenge when she left the city to run Redco, was to create a whole new organization from scratch. And so they did. They've done a fantastic job of doing that. We have a great team of people over at Redco now. They've been through some challenges because they've had some people who they've hired and that didn't work out. So like any other startup organization, they've had to get a structure in place that is working well, and they do have that now. So the real challenge, as you heard, is taking all of this that we have now and having it begin to generate more and more revenue so that it is able to continue functioning. So that's really where we are now.
Okay. And so what I'd like the folks in the community to understand, if you're watching this, is I want you to really understand that prior to CEO Muhammad taking over Redco was a wholly owned structure of the city of Rochester. It was spun off. Prior to being spun off, all of the staff who worked for Redco worked for the city of Rochester. So when it was spun off, those staff weren't working for the city of Rochester anymore. So Redco had to go out and get staff. So what we've effectively done is we've increased significantly the number of folks who are in our community who are reaching out to small businesses on the ground. Redco's mission, focus, the way they do the work, is that they literally go down our commercial corridors and they talk to the small businesses with the goal of getting them funded through either the resources that Redco has or working collaboratively with the city of Rochester. And there are times when both of them will fund an entity, and that's what's in this report. So with that being said, though they have some resources, the resources they have in many instances are limited and tied specifically to making loans. Those resources are not available to cover operating expenses. So what Redco is here asking us for are dollars that they can use, that are unrestricted dollars that they can use for operating expenses. They've shared with us that they have roughly $1 million deficit. Now there are some dollars in the Redco budget that they can use for operating expenses, but the challenge is this: if you use those dollars for operating expenses, then you don't have those dollars to lend. And in my mind, and I believe also in the president of the board's mind, the work that Redco is doing is specifically and particularly tied to the city of Rochester, and that this is important work that needs to be done. And as the secretary for Redco and the chair for NBD, I believe that we should find a way to provide some manner of funding to Redco. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns at this time on this item? CEO Muhammad, do you have a closing statement?
Yeah, I just would say I thank the council for all the work that you are doing and allowing our organization to present. And thank you, Commissioner Miller, for cutting your time. And, you know, if there's anything further, you can email me, but we have audited financials. We always have clean audits. And we're doing everything above board.
Oh, and to that point, anything you want to, you don't have to, if you want to know what Redco's doing, you can go on the website. All of the meeting minutes are up there. Everything's up. All of the loan information, who we've loaned to, when we loaned it to, how much it is, the grant dollars that we've made available, it's all on the website. You can also apply for a loan so, and reach out to underwriting. So, you know, hey, don't just sit there and be nosy. Come on in and get some money.
Yeah, I just have one more thing. Is the a breakdown of like what the expenses are spent on the website?
Yeah, you'll be able to see that through our audit
Like
financials.
loans versus operating.
You'll be able to see all of that through our audit financials.
Okay.
But if there's something on there that you don't understand, like myself sometimes, you can ask our finance director just to clarify.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time. And did Councilmember Lightfoot leave? All right. Well, in that case, we're going to get back to the regular business of the committee meeting. So, introductory number 85, amending ordinance number 2022-103 relating to the acquisition of permanent water line easements over 51 Holland Street. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns on that?
Move it.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and now we vote. All in favor of the introductory, please say aye.
Aye.
Hang on one second. All right, so all in favor of that, please say aye. All opposed, please say nay. Introductory passes. Introductory number 86, extending the periods of performance and amending funding sources related to housing opportunities for persons with AIDS program. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns?
Move it.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded, and now we vote. All in favor of introductory number 86, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. Introductory passes. Introductory number URA2, resolution approving the Rochester Urban Renewal Agency 2023-24 annual budget, performance measures for 2023, and performance measures report for 2022. Before we vote on that item, I was hoping that Commissioner, that you could talk a little bit about the relocation program that will, and some of the items that we covered in our questions.
Sure. I'd be happy to do that. And we also have Rick Rinsky here is kind of our resident expert on that. But one of the questions was about the Uniform Relocation Act, or as we generally call it, the URA. Anytime that we have a property that we acquire, typically if the property is occupied, we have to provide a means of moving that tenant to another location. So once we have the interest in acquiring a property, and so a perfect example of that would be Bull's Head Plaza. We own the actual plaza, but there are a number of other buildings in that area that had to be acquired as part of the development process. So in order to acquire any of those buildings, the first thing we would have to do is have an appraisal done. We would determine what the fair market value is of the building. And then based on that, we would have to provide what is called just compensation, which means we have to compensate the property owner for the cost of the building. If there's a tenant in the building, we have to provide them with relocation expenses, and that is broken into two buckets. One bucket for moving expenses and another bucket for reestablishment expenses. So if I had a restaurant and I had equipment in there, I would have to pay that restaurant the expenses to relocate the restaurant to another place, and then I would have to also pay them, so that's a moving expense, and we'd also have to pay them for a reestablishment expense, which means you have to unhook the stove and you have to reconnect the stove in the new location. You have to unhook the coolers and you have to reinstall the coolers. So those two pieces are pieces that we would assist with, and that allows the business to be reestablished in a new location. So the Uniform Relocation Act is something that makes sure that as people are relocated, typically through no fault of their own, because in general, when we acquire these properties, we acquire them through eminent domain, which means that the city has a public purpose that requires us to acquire that property. We can acquire it, and we get to do that because as the municipality, that is our right. So the Uniform Relocation Act is just a very fair way of making sure that when people have their property acquired by the municipality, that they are relocated and made as much as possible whole for that. So that's a brief explanation for that. If you have other more detailed questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those or have.
Council Vice President.
Thank you. Two questions. One, since you brought up the relocation allocation, if I remember, it's $1,000. Is that right?
No.
For tenants, for residential.
Oh, for residential?
Yeah.
So if we acquire a residential property, is what you're saying, if we acquire some
For
residential
okay,
property? Or?
so you would pay the owner
Yes.
the fair market value, but the tenant,
Oh,
if
okay,
I'm
I see
remembering,
what you mean, right.
I
That's
think it's
correct.
$1,000.
That's correct, yes.
Do you know if they're looking at raising that due to the cost of inflation? It's pretty, $1,000,
Doesn't
won't even
seem
get you a
like a lot.
security deposit these days.
Right. I don't know if there's any interest in increasing that amount. We did run into that, for example, in the properties on Laura Street and in the Beechwood area where we were looking to relocate the police precinct. So we did have
Right.
to acquire those properties, and you're correct, the allocation for those tenants was less than what we would possibly expect. But it
I
was
wonder-
generally just moving expenses, so it
Right.
didn't have the reestablishment expenses. I mean, they wouldn't typically have things that would have to be disconnected and then reconnected.
Right.
So,
I'm just wondering, since it happens probably so infrequently, if we could consider upping it, even though it would be above what's required of us,
right.
to make sure that people can get set up in their new location. And then the second, to Councilmember Patterson's question about the land swap for the project on David Street. And the answer was it's no longer a viable option because I assume the owner doesn't want to participate in the land swap. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the owner is a company called Ematech, as you know.
Mhm.
They're located in that area. And they
So-
were, it was something that we were negotiating with them, and they've decided that they don't really want to pursue that.
So I guess my question is, since it's in an urban new renewal district, there's even more flexibility, I think, to acquire it by eminent domain, and why haven't we considered that?
We have, as you know, a very significant number of properties in that area already. And eminent domain, although it is certainly a power we have, we often view that as kind of the last option. I mean, if there's no other option, then we would consider that. But it is, fairly aggressive in terms of taking someone's property. So
Mhm.
we have to have an actual public purpose for it, and we have to be able to demonstrate that there's really no other option. So we
Okay.
don't.
Yeah, I don't know
we
the
don't just
details
do
of
it
the project,
randomly.
but it's just a question I had. Thanks.
Yeah, we have other property that is suitable in that same vicinity, and so there's really no need to take this property through eminent domain.
All right. And on that note, so seeing no other questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor? I need a motion and a second.
Move.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and now we vote. All in favor of introductory URA 2, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. Introductory passes. So we have one other piece of business before us today, and that is the 2022 annual report to the City Council from the Land Bank Corporation. So Commissioner, I turn this over to you, and we await your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to invite the head of the Land Bank Board, Carol Wheeler, to come up and give a presentation. As most of you know, in fact, I'm sure all of you, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, Carol, if you can come over and join us. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I wasn't watching where you went. Sorry about that. As all of you know, we have a land bank. The land bank legislation that was created back in 2013 allowed us to create a land bank for the city of Rochester. Since that time, the land bank has been an extraordinary, valuable resource for the city of Rochester. The land bank legislation allows the land bank to acquire properties, to take those properties, have them rehabbed, sell them directly to owner occupants if we like, or have the people who rehab them own them. It allows us another thing that is extremely important, and that is the opening bid at an auction. So prior to the auction, the land bank can identify the properties that it's interested in, and once we identify those properties, the minute the auction starts, the land bank makes the first bid on all of the properties and is able to buy those properties at the opening bid. So that allows the land bank to then create a set of properties that can then be made available to folks in the community. So that's in very brief what the land bank does. What Carol will talk to you about is what the land bank has done over the past year. And as we talked about with Redco a few minutes ago, the land bank works much in the same way that Redco did. The staff of the land bank is made up of staff of the city of Rochester. So our director of real estate, Paul Scuderi, is the executive director of the land bank. Our manager of housing, Carol Wheeler, is the board chair of the land bank board. And the staff of the land bank is made up of staff members of primarily the real estate department. So we don't have staff expenses, but you know, the land bank staff are made up of folks who are already here. So.
And just before you begin, just a correction to the folks, we will not be reviewing the 2022 annual land bank annual report. We will be reviewing the 2023 annual land bank report. So that's not your error. We just had the wrong report, but we got the right report now, so we all know what we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to come before you to report to you the activities of the Rochester Land Bank for the fiscal year of 22-23. Dana, our Commissioner Miller, he was able to provide you some background information on the land bank. And I just want to mention also that the Rochester Land Bank was actually implemented or formed in 2013, and at that time there were only 8 land banks within the state of New York, but now 10 years later there are 26 land banks in New York State. And we're making this presentation today as a requirement of Article 16 of the New York State Not-for-Profit Corporation Law, which requires that the chairperson of the land bank make an annual report regarding our projects, expenditures, and administrative activities for the previous year. And this all has to be done by March 15th, so we only have a week left. The report, hopefully, everyone had seen it prior to now, but if not, it has been distributed for everyone, and I'm just going to kind of go through each of the activities, the various sections, and at the end, entertain any questions that you may have. I do want to acknowledge any of our members that are here, and that is our co-chair, Eric Frisch, who is the Director of Development Services. It's our treasurer, John Fornoff. Kurt Martin is another member of our board. Lachey Harris, which is our secretary, and she is also appointed by City Council. James Smith is also one of our members, and glad to have his support. Eric Van Duzen, another appointee by the mayor. We also have the support of our law department, and that is with Stephanie Prince. And I'm just going to say they have really done quite a bit this year, and we will be going through some of those details. Also, again, as the commissioner had mentioned, the staff, particularly of real estate, and our executive director of the land bank board has been very active and definitely oversees the day-to-day work of the Rochester Land Bank, and that's Paul Scuderi. So as far as the highlights, and that goes in on the first page, the highlights for the year. First, it is the special project is historic preservation and affordable rental. And this was a partnership between the Land Bank, the Enterprise Community Partners, and a local NBD developer. And they were and did create 2 units of quality affordable housing and return a long time vacant property into productive use. The other highlight is the Land Bank Initiative Phase 1. This is the first time at the state level that they have offered operating assistance. And so the city was able to, the Rochester Land Bank was able to actually apply for these funds and did receive funding of $100,000 to help with the operations. Neighbors for Neighborhoods completions. This was something that everyone was very, very excited about when it first came out, and we did complete it within this past year, and hopefully in sometime in the future, maybe this is something that would be funded, but this was part of a special project, and we were able to complete 3 projects through funding through the state, and hopefully, like I said, we would be able to actually complete others, because this is an opportunity where there were properties that were being acquired, and we were especially targeting the smaller landlords that were in close proximity to the rental properties that were going to be assisted and supported. As far as activities and initiatives and expenditures within the year, we talked about, or we should mention all the administrative activities. This is all the board actions that were taken. Won't go through all of them, but we did have some that were related to the purchase or acquisition of Michigan Street, which was one of the N4N properties. We had resolutions related to approving our budget for the year, and which is a good, I think, policy to have, is reapproving our policies and bylaws and making sure that everything is up to date. And so that was one of the things that had taken place as far as the resolutions that you see listed. We were able to submit our budget and financial plan to the Public Authorities Board back in April. We are required also to have an annual meeting, and as a part of that meeting, we went over our investment reports, procurement reports, our mission statement, makes sure we're still staying consistent with that, performance measures report, and operations and accomplishments report, and also a self-evaluation of the board of the Rochester Land Bank. We reviewed our audited financial statements, and these were completed by Freed Maxick CPAs, and that was approved by the board. The projects that were identified, we did highlight a little bit at the beginning, but it was Neighbors for Neighborhoods, that N4N project, which we completed this year, and the last project to be completed was 225-227 Michigan Street, and we are very thankful that we were able to get this property rehabbed and back on the tax roll, and these are 2 very high quality units that have been rehabilitated, and they will be affordable for the next 20 years. The historic preservation and affordable rental, definitely a property that we were very happy to see back in operation. It had been vacant for approximately 25 years. This was located over in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood, and it was one of the last properties that the city of Rochester had actually held for many, many years, but we were able to secure some funding and have it rehabbed, and The ribbon cutting was just held late in 2022, and it has really made a difference right on that corner, or right near that corner on Madison Street. And we were very happy that who completed the work was actually a minority developer. And again, this is new rental housing, new high-quality rental units that will remain affordable. Another project that we have underway is the acquisition and stabilization of zombie properties, and we've identified a couple of properties that we have targeted. And which is so important about this, as you know, that we had been in the pandemic, and one of the ways that the Rochester Land Bank actually receives its properties is through the tax foreclosure sale. So if we did not have a tax foreclosure sale, then, all right, where would the properties come from? And so we were able to identify some third-party tax lien properties that we were able to acquire. And we do have the addresses. That was Brooklyn Street, as well as Rosemary, I'm sorry, in Rosemary Street. And we're looking forward to both those, as opposed to just being rental, they will actually become owner-occupied structures. One of the things that we're very, very hopeful of is that as we're moving forward with the acquisition and rehab of properties, that they will actually be targeted for home ownership and not just for rental, as some of them had been in the past. As far as initiatives, if you're following along with me, the Land Bank Initiative, Phase 1, I mentioned to you that we, the Rochester Land Bank, received $100,000, and this was for operations, and this is for a 3-year period. It's renewable for a total of 3 years, and we are using those funds for additional staffing and to offset any insurance and property management costs. We're very, very hopeful that funding will continue, and we will be able to not only provide operational assistance, but there may be applications, as far as what we're hearing, for acquisition and actually rehabilitation of properties as well. Development Partner Request for Qualifications, the RFQ, something that's very, very important in order to increase the capacity of the land bank and what we're able to accomplish every year. One of the things that we have done is issue an RFQ, and this is inviting developers in the community to partner with us as a land bank partner. So they would have the opportunity to work with us as we're moving toward tax foreclosure, to identify properties that they would be interested in acquiring and rehabbing, and again, with the preference of being able to turn these properties into homeownership opportunities. So this past year, we did issue that RFQ, and 13 development partners were selected. With the tax foreclosure sale, one of the things that happens is that in the event that we acquire property, there is a need for property managers. So one of the things that we had to do in anticipation of the properties that we would acquire through the tax foreclosure sale would be to put out an RFP for property management. And that is something that we are just getting the results from, and very, very soon we'll actually have a property manager engaged. As far as the
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure, sure.
I guess it's maybe just a comment. In future reports, would it be possible to include just, maybe there will be in the electronic appendix, but just a list of all the properties the land bank currently owns? Because I understand the land bank acquired a bunch of properties in the auction back in November. Is that right?
That is correct. I mean, that was when the sale was held, but as far as actually taking ownership, that was just recently in 2023. So that's why they had not been included in this report. But it's definitely something that we can share with, with council.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly excited that the land bank continues to be more aggressive in acquiring properties, and I think the more we can see the breadth of those, the better. But understood that it was last year, not this year, or this year, not last year.
Right, right.
Thanks.
As far as our financials, won't go through all the detail. We do have our audited financials that were completed, and what is good as far as that financial report that was provided and the review that was done by the CPAs is that it was clean. There were no recommendations as far as, anything that we could do better, but it was a just nice, clean audit, and we were definitely pleased with that. Upcoming activities, what we are looking to do over this next year is that we want to apply for phase 2 of the land bank initiative, as we talked about, as far as operations, but also having the opportunity to use funds for acquisition, stabilization, pre-development, and demolition. And that round of applications will probably be due within the next couple of weeks, actually. Also, what we are looking to do is work with the Financial Empowerment Center, the Rochester Housing Authority, and some other stakeholders to implement a program that will help to increase home ownership among people of color. And this is related to the Living Cities grant the city has received as a part of closing the gap network. And the gap refers to the racial wealth gap that exists in the U.S. and participating acutely in the communities of color. And some of these activities will include accessing homeownership opportunities delivered to Head Start parents and associations and cash incentives programs for participation in counseling in the Financial Empowerment Center. And those workshops, those activities will actually be starting within the upcoming month. Rehab the Dream, RTD. It is a land bank's first way, if you will, of actually directing properties to home buyers themselves, actually having the homeowners actually purchase. And we have put together a process and a program with home headquarters where there will be funding toward the acquisition and the rehab for these particular properties that are sold to these buyers that are interested in actually living in them. And the land bank, we like to stay on top of what is going on, and with that, we are a member of the the Land Bank Association for New York State, and with that, we're able to advocate along with them for additional resources and staying on the pulse of what is happening around the state within land banks and things that we need to be aware of and be prepared to address. And of course, we'll be continuing to look at and support any of the City of Rochester's activities that will need this type of tool that we are using or that we have with the land bank. I mentioned to you that we will do several properties or complete several properties as far as the tax lien sales that we had participated in for Brooklyn, 88 Rosemary. And again, just want to say that those are properties that will become owner occupied. And as this past year, one of the properties that we looked at as far as strategic blight removal was the 225, 227 Michigan Street, and we're glad that that one has actually been completed. So you have on page 9, that's the appendices. It has pictures of the properties that we have actually done as far as 4 Brooklyn, 88 Rosemary, and the ribbon cutting from 6 Madison Street. So with that, that was really our report for this year, and if you have any questions, you know, I'll entertain them at this time.
So can you talk a little bit more about the Rehabilitate the Dream program?
I'm sorry, which one?
Rehabilitate the Dream?
The DREAM program, that's with home headquarters, and as properties that the land bank has that we will be selling directly to home buyers, they can apply to home headquarters for acquisition rehab mortgage. In addition to that, they will have access to an additional $50,000 to help with the rehab of those properties.
That is fabulous. And that is of those 40 new blighted properties, or is that, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so that is a part of the ones that we have taken as a result of the tax foreclosure sale, as well as if we were to take anything else as far as, say, like a third-party tax lien that we actually purchased. So, and I'm going to ask our executive director as far as any additional detail that I am missing that he may be able to fill in.
Thank you. No, Carol, you summed it up very well. Those are the properties, Councilmember, that we would be using those on. And as Carol had mentioned, any other acquisitions that we make along the way that are strategic, because they don't come around as often as we want them to, right? But when they're presented to us, we kind of jump all over them. And we would make those properties available for the Rehabilitate the Dream program as well. Again, this is only for home ownership, so you need to commit to be the owner and occupant of the property. If it's an investor, then we don't really involve them with this program. So it's one of the ways that we're trying to really push home ownership and owner occupancy. And also our subsequent sale activities will be focused on prioritizing owner occupancy, and we're going to do it in a 2-tiered way. We did this with the city a couple years ago. I'll put my city hat on right now, where we did a sealed bid offering instead of just a general auction. You know how the general auction works. High bid wins, and we take the property. We did a sealed bid where we had the bidders indicate if they intended to be an owner occupant or if they intended to be an investor. And if you intended to be an owner occupant, if we got any of those are the ones we looked at first. We would forego higher, auction or bid price.
Yes.
And make the sacrifice to get an owner occupant because it's beneficial long term. And we intend to do the same thing with the land bank. If nobody wants it as an owner occupant, then we'll look at it as an investment property. But we want to at least expose it to the market and make the effort to do that. And I think it's worth the while. And we certainly walked away from some money from the city standpoint to do it. But I think long term, it was a benefit. And we plan to do the same process with the land bank.
How are we going to market this out to the community? Because, it's funny because Commissioner Miller and I have been talking about it, the Dollar House program from days gone by forever. And
I've heard of that once in a while.
Yeah, like every other meeting I'm in.
Yeah. Well, we will advertise it as best we can on our own website, but we're going to work with city communications to get as much information out, press releases, try to get the mayor involved. When the mayor's involved, everybody takes notice and attention. So if we can try to parlay those things into it, I think we can get an awful lot of attention drawn to it and really attract the people that we're trying to target with these programs.
Are we doing so? I'm happy that we've got 40 houses to work with, but to the point of the report, one of the things that you mentioned is that we have a fair number of zombie homes where you got a third-party lien holder and they just pay the taxes, and so we really can't do anything. Have we thought about reaching out to these guys and saying, hey, why don't you donate it or whatever you have to do to get it off your rolls and not count against your core dollars, so you can give it to us and you don't lose anything, and we can get this thing back into a quality housing situation for people?
Not only have we thought about it, we've done it. We've reached out to several of our tax lien providers, third parties, and a couple acquisitions that Carol noted were from our tax lien providers.
Okay.
They're not always willing to work with us. It doesn't fit into their plans sometimes. But we do make the effort, and we have started to kind of establish a relationship with one of them, and they're presenting properties when they come up. They have offered a couple to us that just were not, they were more demolition properties than anything else. So we've taken them down. We've taken them down on a different, kind of a different program. But we are definitely engaged in those conversations. And as we've gotten further and further away from the termination of the tax lien agreement, some more properties are being offered to us. So I think there's a potential for some. I don't want to say significant. I don't want to raise your hopes up too high, but I think there's a potential for some more properties coming into our control, and we're going to take advantage of every single one that gets presented to us. I want every property.
Right. What
Not
about
to be selfish, but I want every property.
What about our banks who are holding zombie properties and just it's just out there and they just do what they do and they cut the grass bare minimum if we find them? Are we doing outreach to those guys too?
We're trying. They're different. They're kind of a tough nut to crack. They have a different operational setup than I can understand. They sometimes let properties sit for years, and nobody seems to know or anything about them from the bank. We have reached out to a couple of these folks. I know our code enforcement has a direct line of contact with them, and so we've been able to connect with them through the people who are managing the properties, and then from there we can kind of take 2 steps, and then we get to somebody who can actually make that decision. So we're definitely trying. Doesn't always work out, but we are definitely trying. And we do have an open communication channel with them now.
Okay. Council Vice President?
Yes, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Also about the RTD program. Sounds great. I wondered the home headquarters, are they able to give out mortgages for less than $50,000? Because I know that's a barrier for some of these properties.
Yep. Yes, they are.
And are they able, could we leverage them? Because, not all of these properties that are less than 50,000 are coming through the auction or the foreclosure process. And would they be able to offer those loans to, say someone who wants to buy their house next door that's $30,000? So would we be able to help people that aren't buying through the land bank process?
No, they would have to be associated with the land bank to take advantage of that. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't approach home headquarters on their own outside of land bank involvement. They could certainly do that. They have that ability to do that if they want to. And the 50,000, I don't mean to cut you off. The 50,000 most likely would be exceeded because it would be the acquisition and the rehab. And there's very few properties, as I'm sure you probably realize, that would cost less to rehab and acquire and still keep it below.
Because it's both acquisition and.
Yeah.
So I guess my thinking is, and I understand it doesn't work like this now, but how could we leverage what we already do to help people outside of the land bank process? And is it just because, our limited staff, or is there a way that we could expand it through some other means? Does that make sense?
I guess I'm trying to figure out how this program would work. So, we're doing it because we have properties and we want to sell them to people. Are you talking about privately owned properties where the city or land bank has no involvement with?
Right. Because you're already working with a funder and you're doing the things that someone would need to be able to take control of one of these properties, even though it's not a land bank property, it's still solving the same issue, if you know what I mean.
I do. I don't know that there's a role for the land bank or the city to be involved in that right there, except to make it known. Yeah, I guess I'm not really. I'm hesitating to answer because I don't know.
Well,
as I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a role for the CDF for that CDFI to have in this process, and if people were aware of them, and they're not local, they're in Syracuse.
That
so
maybe
that's
the
one of
city
problems.
could facilitate that through a partnership, and I guess maybe you're just saying advertise it,
Yeah, I'd have to give that some thought. I don't want to blurt an answer out without thinking it through.
Yeah, I
but
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Just maybe thinking outside of the box a little bit.
Sure.
On my part. And the properties that are homeowners, I know some of the other programs like Home Rochester, we require that they live there for 10 years. Does that have the same requirement?
There is a requirement, and it's. Oh, I'm losing track of my thought. I'm losing track of it. Carol, do you recall what the year is?
10 years.
10 years. 10 years. Thank you. Yeah.
And in terms of marketing, if say there's a home on I don't know, Genesee Street,
Okay.
have we thought about marketing to neighbors, in a certain radius that the house is going up for market? So because obviously someone who lives nearby is going to have more of an vested interest in making sure that it's a nicer home or would like to live in the same neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah. We would definitely consider that to be a really good person to purchase the property, or
Yeah.
and we always work with the NSC offices who are local to the communities, so we spread it out there and we let all the neighborhood groups be aware of it as much as we can, without actually physically knocking on everybody's door as much as we can. We try
Or
to let
doing a
all the
direct
neighbors
mail.
know. Yeah. So we would definitely consider that a very viable purchaser, and we would hope that they would have some connection and loyalty to their neighborhood, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I'm trying to think how that would work. There would be a different process, I guess, to give priority to someone geographically. If there's not any protected class that way, I think we could probably work through that.
That would be great.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, to dive in real quick, please do the research and find out whether or not we can geo-restrict where we make home purchases available through the City of Rochester or City of Rochester entities. Because one of the challenges is we just happen to have a program called Buy the Block. And it's income restricted, but it's not geographically restricted.
Yeah.
So, my concern is, if let's be sure that we can do it before we say, because that's just a whole can of worms, and there are a lot of folks who would like that in a lot of places, and I can understand that. But the challenge with that is, well, okay, you want to do it over on Genesee Street, you want to do it around Scio, so why not around Park Avenue? And if you can do it here, how come you can't do it there? And if you can do it there, it limits who has access to the properties.
That's a good point.
So that's my concern, is like, it sounds, it's great over here because you figure, well, nobody wants to live over here, but if you can do it over here, you can do it over there, and, everybody wants to live over there. Yeah. So, and then you cut out that diversity that you're looking for, you lose it. So that's my, and I'm in favor of the idea, but it's like the other side of it is, you do it over here, how come you can't do it over there? And if I can do it over here, so I mean, either way, I would just hope that we would check and find out and make sure.
I will definitely check with our corp counsel. And as you brought it up, it's a good point. As you brought it up, it seems as though that issue may have been raised previously. I will 100% check with our corp counsel and make sure we're not crossing any lines that we shouldn't be.
Cool. Council President? Yes, so thank you for the report, and I'll dive a little bit deeper personally into looking at it. One of the questions I wanted to bring up during our NBD quarterly, probably about a year ago, we had a discussion around the auction and whether or not we could transfer. I mean, obviously the money's got to come from somewhere, but transfer properties to the land banks. We're not using land bank funds to pay back taxes, but then using that money to go back into investing in the property. So I think it would mean that the city would have to pick up the tab on whatever the back taxes are. I guess my question is around, could we revisit that conversation and look at that some more? Is that something that we can discuss? Because I know the land bank's resources are limited in terms of the number of properties you can take on at a time, and I think it would be helpful for us to at least have the discussion, because there are some good properties that come to the foreclosure auction that I just feel like if there was more bandwidth to take it on, we could do a lot more.
Yes, we can certainly I can tell you from a land bank standpoint, we love that idea.
Yes.
That idea has not always been, supported all around because there is some budget implications for that, and our budget director's here, but our treasurer is not, and neither is our corp counsel, and they're the main players in that discussion. But I think we can certainly restart those speaks to see where we are with that discussion.
So with that, I'll offer for consideration that we talk and discuss the possibility of using the Housing Trust Fund as an avenue for this in the future. Not to say we're going to do this tomorrow, but I think there's potential other sources of funding down the pipe that we could look at allocating resources towards the land bank to acquire more properties and do more around home ownership.
Love it.
That's it.
And just to that point, I humbly submit, and I'm sure the budget director or someone will be able to correct me, but if we're taking the property for back taxes, we've already bought it. So what is the why does a dollar have to move from one city pocket to another?
So, council member, I will admit I need to educate myself on this process a bit more. So,
Thank you, sir.
I will take up that assignment.
Fair
as
enough.
well as follow up to President Melendez's comments as well.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at it from the perspective of we're taking it for the back taxes, so this is how we're recouping our loss. So that's what it is. We already got it. It's ours. We don't need to spend anything. You owe it. And as we do whatever it is we do, we recoup those dollars on the sale side. So, and once we have control of it, part of what we sell it for is making sure we recoup our back taxes. So.
And Councilmember Patterson, to that point, my feeling is if we can make it a stipulation that this transaction that happens with the land bank ultimately lands into home ownership, we have a sustainable tax revenue for a period of time.
Yep. Because those dollars come in, and then as we sell it, those dollars fund the land bank. Yeah, I'm totally with you. Well, I think everybody's had enough. So seeing no other business to come before this committee, we stand adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Long meeting. Nap time for everybody. Everybody take a nap, right? Well, yeah, that too. How are you, sir?
Doing well.
Nice, quiet, uneventful meeting.
Yeah, nobody's throwing tomatoes.
Next week. No, well, like 2 weeks from now. Guaranteed. Actually, next week, too. Thursday. Next week, Thursday, rioting. Pure, unmitigated. Bring your raincoat.
Bring my face shield.
All of that. Yeah. Have you seen, remember the Blues Brothers? They were in the country western bar. Think that. They were throwing beer bottles at.
Have a nice weekend.
You too, sir. Kind of place that plays country and western.
was a well-delivered report. No. The book and all the other stuff that goes with it.